the person before the professional is the secret to success. And what that means is, care about human beings first and foremost, get to know them as human beings first and foremost, and then you can drive the performance from a professional point of view. I knew it would mean that it would probably be a while before I got another job at the top level in Australian football. But I also thought I need to stand up for what I believe in here. And he said, you can't go in there. And I said, my brother's in there. He said, no, you're not going. And I grabbed him by the gun and actually threw him out the way. Now I'm 5'10", and back then was probably about 90 kilos dripping wet. He was about 6'2", 6'3", and, built and trained. But that's your survival instinct, right?
Adrenaline. Today's guest on the podcast is Phil Moss, probably best known to sports fans in Australia for his role as the former head coach of the Central Coast Mariners, also the work he's done in the media talking football. In more recent years, he's worked in corporate leadership and executive coaching, so you're going to learn a heap of stuff today. The importance of knowing your why, of having your values clear and living to them with courage, importance of emotional regulation, some great tales of his days in football, and also a harrowing story of just how close him and his brother came to disaster at the Maccabiah Games bridge collapse way back in 1997. I'm Ian Hawkins, and this is Sport is Life. The purpose of sport, as I see it, is to see your vision become a reality, find your voice, create strong connections, and learn to trust your body. G'day, Phil. How are you going?
Great, Ian.
Good to hear. I love, when I reached out, I was very much reaching out because of what I knew about your sporting journey. What I didn't know is that you do similar work to me now in the corporate environment, which is really cool. But we might start with the sport if it's all the same to you. So yeah, cool. I read with interest, seems to be all of our best footballers either are born somewhere else or their parents or grandparents are. So how early did you come from the UK to Australia?
Well, I think I started strengthening my influencing skills when I was about 3 months old, because I convinced Mum and Dad to move to Australia. I wasn't real keen on the weather in London at that age. But no, Dad's English. He's a Mancunian. Mum's Australian from Sydney. So they moved out here when I was about 3 months old.
Yeah, nice. Aren't we lucky that you did? So, settled in Sydney?
Yes, always northern beaches of Sydney, apart from the time I had up at the Central Coast, where I was living at Terrigal for about 5 years. Travelled, to different places in the world, but home has always sort of been the northern beaches in Sydney.
Yeah, and straight into football at a young age?
Very. There's actually there's a family famous photo up on Mum and Dad's sort of side table in the lounge room at their place, of me staring at a ball, transfixed at a ball before I could even walk. I was in my nappy in the backyard, no shirt on, sitting there cross-legged, looking at this football that Dad had put in front of me. And the joke is that's the day I fell in love with the round ball, and it's carried on ever since.
How good. And do you have good memories of those days? Like, were you pretty handy from the start?
I always sort of say this. I don't think I was ever born to be a player. I think my natural talents really came through as a coach and a leader. Yeah. And obviously the education, the path of education to become a sort of vice captain, coach, leader in the corporate world, and now an executive leadership coach, has obviously been long. And I've got my parents to thank for those early years, and then just a thirst to learn along the way. But I had to work really, really hard at being a player, a professional player. Didn't get my professional debut till I was just about 27,
yeah, right.
Which is grandparenthood in professional sporting terms. But I had a little bit of bad luck with injuries at the wrong times. Maybe I could have played professionally earlier in life, but they're the cards I was dealt, and I just had the bit between the teeth to get to the top level in Australia, and I managed to do that in the old National League with Northern Spirit.
Yeah, Northern Spirit. Okay, the name still lives on. I'm not sure there's too much resemblance to what it was back then, but yeah, they were some good days because it was like it was almost bringing a bit of new style of culture to football and filling out North Sydney Oval pretty regularly. It must have been good times back then.
They were, and I think honestly, Northern Spirit was ahead of its time. I think that was probably the type of franchise that was ready-made for the A League. But it came
Yeah,
along in 1998. The National League didn't close down till a few years later, and I think it became a victim of the sort of last throes of the National League. I think a club like that would have thrived in the A League, and I think we sort of bought Perth Glory to another level. They went professional after we came in. Parramatta Power came into the National League, so I think Northern
yeah,
Spirit helped sort of raise the bar, but it did become sort of a victim of circumstance. I think with the National League coming to its close and the A League starting.
yeah, absolutely. Um,
But they were great days. To your point, sorry, Ian.
yeah, yeah,
Like North Sydney on a Friday night was, you had the
heaving.
noodle markets, and
Yeah, yeah,
I used to live in Narrabeen, which is about a 35 minute drive to North Sydney. And on game day, I'd pick up Clayton Zane and a couple of other players, Chichi Mendez, on the way to the game, and you'd drive past bus stops, and they were full of supporters in Northern Spirit merchandise, and it was a pinch yourself moment because those were sort of scenes you didn't really see in the National League,
yeah,
and then all of a sudden this club gets plonked in North Sydney, and all the way along the Northern Beaches, and that was just the Northern Beaches, right? They were coming from different
yeah, yeah,
locations as well.
yeah,
So it was great fun to be a part of, and a lot of pride as well, because when you're involved in a startup club, and I wasn't just a player, I was also the youth development officer. So I sort of combined both roles and wanted to have an impact on schools development and building a supporter base. And Arnie let me do that, which was good of him at the time, and yeah, they were good days.
yeah. And I can remember non-football fans getting drawn into it. Such was the momentum that it had. My brother-in-law is one that comes to mind, and he's not a huge sports fan, and he was there with the full kit on, one of the painted Northern Spirit soccer balls on his head, and yeah, it's good times. Good story. My wife's going to kill me for telling this story. I'm going to tell it anyway. So I was at Fox Sports at that stage, and in the box on the Friday night, which I didn't get to do every time we went there, but on this night, and Kate's sitting next to Robbie, as in Robbie Slater, and they're just talking football and that sort of stuff. So she says to him, "So Robbie, do you play football?" Which I
Yeah,
reckon he actually loved, because I'm sure you would have got bombarded with people who only knew him as a footballer, but he just had probably a really pleasant chat with someone who just was talking to him as a regular person. But we still
yeah.
laugh about that one.
Yeah, well, a funny story. His first ever training session with Northern Spirit. So he was, the Socceroos star coming back to the National League, and
Mm,
first session was a rainy day. It was down the bottom of North Sydney, where I can't remember the name of the park, but it met the Sydney Harbour. And anyway, Arnie set out, a game with small goals, and these small goals that we had were like heavy metal. You wouldn't see them on a training pitch now, like
yeah.
you just wouldn't get away with them. But anyway, ball was played through for Robbie, and I was sort of the last defender, and I slid in with a ball and all tackle. Unfortunately, because it was wet, we kept sliding, and his right shin hit the upright of the small goal,
Oh no.
and split his shin open straight away. And everyone had thought, like, time literally stood still. Everyone had thought, that's it, Mossy's
You killed
broken the
him.
leg of the of the marquee man. And he got up yelling and screaming, "Don't you know who I am? What are you doing?" Sliding in, and it was a great tackle, I have to say. It was one of my best tackles. And anyway, Arnie, he did what he had to do and stopped the session. He said, "Mossy, my office after the session." And anyway, long story short, his leg wasn't broken. He needed a couple of stitches in his shin, and got to the office. And Arnie said, "Look, Mossy," he goes, "Great tackle, mate. Great tackle. Maybe just not on Robbie in a training session, but don't lose that hunger that you've got to win the ball and." Et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, Robbie and I became best mates after that, so we put it
Good
behind us
tackle then.
quickly.
A very
If
good
his
tackle.
leg was broken, I'm not sure we would have been best mates.
No, I don't think so. Grudges can last a long time in football. We know that. For me, I started coaching as a teen. Like I was just drawn to it, and I found I did it naturally well. Probably similar to what you described, although at a very different level, just naturally in those leadership roles. Is that something you experienced? Like, was it always there? You said you were sort of born to be more of a coach than a footballer. Did you have that natural inclination, do you think?
Yeah, I think I did. Like when I think back to as early as I can remember, I always cared about people around me. Probably sometimes to my own detriment. I'd put people before me all the time in any given situation, and always wanted other people to stand out, and achieve, above and beyond what they thought they were capable of. And I can even remember doing that way back in the under 10s, under 11s. I had a fantastic captain in the junior rep team, Ivan Cleary, who's gone on to do incredible things in rugby league, obviously, with Penrith Panthers most recently. And I remember learning a lot from Ivan just as a 10-year-old, just the way he held himself and his aura on a football field and his natural leadership capabilities. And I think that was just one leader from early on where I know that I sort of molded myself a bit around that, and it's just kept going. And I always sort of take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, around what works, what doesn't work. But I think it's just been innately inbuilt in me from a very young age, because I remember my parents always saying, when something's tough or something's challenging or something is outside your comfort zone, walk straight towards it, don't walk away from it, roll your sleeves up, embrace it, because that's where you learn more about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you've experienced it in football where people don't necessarily have those sort of leadership skills. Like clearly Ivan's cracked some code there around building connection. Like they just look so connected. You can see it when they're on the field. Is that something that has been a big part of your success as a coach? Is that whether that's been on the sporting field or now working with people in a corporate environment? Is your ability to connect and see them as people first?
I think so. I mean, I have a very strong view that the person before the professional is the secret to success, and what that means is care about human beings first and foremost, get to know them as human beings first and foremost, and then you can drive the performance from a professional point of view. Because if you don't know what makes people tick, or you don't know what their demotivators are, what the roadblocks are, or the speed humps in their brain, then how are you going to identify, acknowledge, and break down, so it can unleash the motivators on the positive side? And so, yeah, I think having a genuine passion for people and connection and relationships, building trust, definitely plays a part in, driving elite performance, and high performance, and winning performance as well. And when I say winning, I don't necessarily mean lifting trophies, although that's critical in professional sport, of course. But
Mm.
I've always sort of been driven by the reward you feel when you've helped in some small way develop someone to another level. And I always used to say to players, if I work with you for a minute, a day, a week, a season, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, and you get an opportunity to go to the next level, I'll be the one driving you to the airport. Because that
Yeah.
for me is what it's all about. And, a byproduct of that, if you like, if you get that side right, a byproduct can be trophies. But I've never sort of been driven by the silverware, although I'm a winner and I'm a terrible loser. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's what is your why? How do you connect to that? Because that's the strongest driver for me.
Love it. That's something that I was conscious of, having learned that in the sporting world when I had a team of staff under me at Fox, was like, we can't guarantee you're going to get a promotion here, but if we can help you find a job somewhere else, we will absolutely do that. And then they'll play hard for you, right? They'll work hard for you because they know you've actually got them as a person first and foremost. So have you, like, I know that's part of the reason they got you there in the first place was those leadership skills, but have you seen those learnings that only come in that sporting environment just effortlessly transfer into the corporate environment?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say effortlessly, because I think you've got to work hard at everything. But there's definitely transferable skills. There's definitely, there's a lot of leadership, culture, mindset, performance skills that you learn in sport that have been transferable across. I think the key is to work hard to make it relevant. You can't just put everything in the corporate world next to a sporting analogy. You've got to make it relevant for corporate leaders, banking leaders, because sometimes you're one-on-one, other times you're in front of their leadership team, other times you're in part of their wider leadership team, which can be up to, it can be up to a few hundred leaders.
Yeah.
So I think working hard at learning about banking, learning about the corporate world has been one of the keys to being at NAB for 7 years. And it's something that I'm really proud of because I had no idea about banking or the corporate world when I stepped in on day one in June 2018. Absolutely no idea. I had a really fantastic leader who I knew through football, who gave me the opportunity to come to NAB, which we can talk about in more detail if you want. But I say he took a career gamble. He said it was an educated guess.
Yeah.
But he set me up for success because he surrounded me with the right technicians. He had one question for me, and that was, do you have a thirst to learn? And if the answer to that is yes, then this will work. If the answer to that's no, then you should stay in football.
Yeah, that's the word you used when you were talking about your coaching, right? You had a thirst to learn, so that was very much already in place. I love how you describe that because it very much is that map, being able to map it across. Like when I'm working in schools and their sporting teams, it's like that's part of the vision. Is like you get them doing these things, then they will learn to map that across in ways that their performance will lift in their academics, their extracurricular, that sort of stuff. You
Yeah.
mentioned like he took the educated guess. It made me think of how often we have to use that gut feel. So just bring it back to football. Have you got an example of maybe where whether you trusted your instincts and got a great result, or maybe you didn't and then realised you should have, especially if it was sort of going against the grain?
Oh yeah, all the time. I think I'm a strong believer in that the human body has three brains. There's the head, the heart, and the gut.
Yeah,
And when you can connect the three, then you're loading the dice in your favour of getting it right.
yeah,
If you're going off just one brain, whichever one that may be, then my advice would be go with your gut rather than your head or your heart,
yeah,
because the gut really, like if you think about it, even when we were, you know, first born, the gut is the first thing. The gut feel is the first thing that sort of guides us. We're hungry, we cry, we get fed.
yeah,
Um, you know, that's if we're going right back to basics. So the older I've got, the more I've learnt to trust my gut. Some will say I've invested way too much in my gut over the years, but from an educational point of view, when it comes to decision making, I've learnt to trust my gut more often. But I always try and make sure that it's connected to the heart and the head. There's way too many examples to focus on when it comes to getting it wrong. But I don't regret any one of them, because if you don't try things, you'll never make a mistake. And if you don't make mistakes, you don't learn. And, I'm a firm believer in you win, you grin, you lose, you learn.
yeah. I don't reckon you ever get it wrong trusting the gut, because to me it's like the gut knows the steps that need to be taken. Sometimes it's not linear, right? So it's like it's navigating you around a problem by taking you sort of four steps, even though logically and as you said, your heart's telling you it should be something completely different. It
Mm.
does take a massive self-trust fall, doesn't it, to
Yeah,
to fully dive in there.
definitely. And I think, Probably my biggest example of following my gut was, which I knew would cost me my job at the Mariners, and it did,
Yeah,
because there's only going to be one winner when you fall out with the owner, and that's the owner of the club. But my gut was telling me something wasn't right. My values and my principles and things like that all of a sudden weren't aligning. And my gut said, you need to stand up for what you believe in here. And I knew it would mean that I'd be unemployed. I knew it would mean that it would probably be a while before I got another job at the top level in Australian football. But I also thought I need to stand up for what I believe in here, and if you can't do it your way, then that's not a good place to be as a professional coach in any sport, because it's so cutthroat. If you're going to go down, you've got to go down doing it your way,
yeah,
and that wasn't happening. So I really, on that one, I really trusted my gut, and it played out exactly the way I thought it would. I think the key is, once you do that, is making sure that you're not defined by being a coach, or defined by Ariane Titmus came back from the last Olympics in Paris. She said, "I'm not a swimmer, I swim." And I think that really resonated strongly with me, because, I had to realize very quickly that losing a job as an A-League coach didn't define me. I was still Mossy the human, father, partner, son, brother, friend.
yeah.
I just happened to be in coaching at the time.
Love that answer. Um, I love that you said you had to stick to your values and your principles, and I think that's something that people can get wrong at times. Uh, they know what they should be doing, but they don't always have the courage to follow through. So that's a massive call for you, particularly knowing you're going to lose your job. Is that a lesson that you pass on to people that you're working with now around their values, and also maybe throw in a tip there for the everyday person that might be listening, to help them to be able to take that step with courage?
Yeah, it is. I use that all the time. In fact, I use the most challenging experiences in my life all the time when it comes to the leadership coaching and talks that I do, because I've learnt so much from others who have been vulnerable enough to share their own stories and experiences. And let's be honest, life's not a bed of roses. You've got your ups and downs. And I just think, if one person walks away hearing my story and the challenges I've been through and how I've sort of rebounded from them, and there's plenty more to come. I'm not at the end of the road yet. I think that's me adding some value, and I've got a pretty strong why statement in my head, and that is to create and drive an environment that empowers people to achieve above and beyond what they thought they were capable of. Now, that can be as a dad, in my personal life, in my married life, it can be in my professional life. There's a lot underneath that, but I'm really anchored to that, and I can anchor to that on an average day, a good day, a great day. Sometimes it's to inspire me to be better. Other
Yeah,
times it's to celebrate that I've had a positive impact. But I think it's really important to understand what gets you out of bed in the morning, understand what your demotivators may be, and acknowledge them, identify them, acknowledge them, and break them down. Work to break them down, and also to be really strong on what your principles and values are, because people often ask me, what's your leadership philosophy and vision? And I'm like, well, I can talk you through what that might look like, but that evolves and it changes a fair bit. Whereas principles and values, for me, are rusted on.
yeah.
And yeah, you might add one or two here or there, and you may tinker with it a little bit, but your you, your deepest principles and values are pretty much rusted on. So they're the things in the tough times that I've fallen back on, and they've served me pretty well.
Love it. What I love also is that you described very similar to what you just described in your why to how you approach your coaching, to helping people to be better than what they thought they were capable of. And
Yeah,
really important, the things Phil's talking about now, the vision, the why, the values, that they're drivers for performance in all areas. And even if you're not an A-League coach or working at the top of corporate, it applies to family, right? It applies to your friendships. It's all of those things become much better when you've got those things sorted. I talk a lot about purpose and going back over the journey and looking for the signs, because your purpose has been there your whole life. Like
Mm.
you've just articulated that through the conversation. We're only 20 minutes in. You've talked about how a youngster, when you were learning these skills, that's what you tried to do, and you're still doing it. You're still teaching it. Do you go into that depth when you're working in a corporate environment around individual purpose, or is that just sort of it's threaded through there automatically as a result of the sort of way you coach?
Yeah, it's a good question, and yes, I do. I mean, I'm extremely open. I am an open book, and I make no apologies for it. It's not for everyone, and I'm not saying it's the right way to be. It's just my way of, as I said a little bit earlier, I've garnered so much knowledge and wisdom from listening to others in leadership, and life really, who are prepared to share. So I think, what right have I got to learn from others if I'm not prepared to be the same myself? So, and I'm quite introverted as an individual. I'm not an extrovert by any stretch, but by nature of the work I've done in football and leadership and commentary and radio, you've got to find the extrovert within you, to some degree.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's important in coaching, I think, to help others find what their principles and values are, and um, leverage them to get greater performance than what they thought they were capable of. And when you see the light bulb come on, and you see someone go to another level of performance, whether it's on a football field, a tennis court, in a big corporate building, tall corporate building, I mean, that for me that's the beauty of coaching.
Absolutely. Those moments that give you a buzz like nothing else.
Mm,
I do want to talk. You said you're an open book, which I love, and you've already said to me you can dive into any of those stories. Before we get to how you unravelled in the Mariners, like how do you get to become that coach? I know you served an apprenticeship under Arnie, I think it was, yeah. But how do you
mm.
get to become an assistant? Like, did you go through the path of coaching elsewhere, or was it a product of having that relationship with Arnie while you were playing? How did that all happen?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I fell into coaching, even though I probably would have got there um, some other way. But I was at Northern Spirit as a first team player. Ian Crook, who used to captain Norwich in England, came out here. He was one of the players at Spirit. He retired and moved into coaching our youth team, and he got appointed as a Newcastle head coach. And he had to leave Northern Spirit literally that week, and it was the week of the grand final. The youth team were in the grand final against Marconi. So it was Arnie basically who said, "Look, the youth team, we need someone to go down there and you know steer the ship this week. They're in the grand final. Crookies had to leave." So that was my sort of first taste of coaching, really, and it was in the deep end, concrete boots and a straight jacket. In you go.
Yeah.
And we ended up getting beaten 5-0 by, I think it was 5-0 or 5-1 by, we got well beaten in the grand final by
Mm.
Marconi at Marconi Stadium, the Palace, or it wasn't resembling a palace that day.
No.
Um, it was more like a jail cell. But I remember going into the dressing room after the game, and you've got some of the best young players in Australian football at the time
Mm.
sitting there with their heads in their hands, thinking their career had just come to an end, and that any aspirations and dreams that they had, were never going to materialise because they've just been smashed in a grand final. And I just remember not even scripting it in my own mind, but just speaking a few truths about their journey ahead, and that this experience will actually help make them, not break them. And just a few simple leadership messages, and all of a sudden I started to see heads lift out of hands, chests started to come back out, shoulders back, and just this belief started to reappear. And it really hit me between the eyes then, the impact that leadership can have. And when you've got dreams and goals of young players, in your hands, you've got a huge responsibility. But even more important than the responsibility is the opportunity that you've got to help guide them. So that's where it all sort of kicked off for me, and I fell in love with the role and that opportunity from that moment forward. And Yeah, it's that gee whiz. That's I think that's about 1999. So we're talking 26 odd years ago. So yeah,
Yeah,
amazing journey since.
such a good story, and that's one thing I'm passionate about when I'm the work I'm doing in community clubs and schools. Is like it's what you're teaching them about for the future, not today. Like,
Mm.
yes, we want to win today, but we don't do that by focusing on the winning. And
Yeah.
it's those messages about who they are as people, and you've only got to experience that once, where you see the shift in body language with a few key messages
Mm.
to see that, yeah, the benefits are huge. That's a great
Yeah, that's
story.
right. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Ian, too, is if you can help these young players be better humans, be better people, first and foremost. So when they walk out the dressing room, are they more mature? Are they more rounded? Are they more balanced than when they first walked into your dressing room? Then you've played a part that's going to stand the test of time, not just for their football career, but for their lives, for their adult lives. So, yeah, it's a really serious responsibility and opportunity, and it's one of the huge rewards of coaching. But I think just to go back to your original question as well about the coaching career, when I retired. I went back to my junior club, which was Manly United, on the Northern Beaches, and I actually put a proposal to them because they didn't have a director of coaching or a technical director at the time. And I put a proposal to them to actually invest in a full time position for that role to lift the club to another level. And obviously, I put my name at the top of that piece of paper because I was really passionate about the club, b
Yeah,
helping take it to another level, and c making sure that I had an income from football. Um, and I'll never forget the president at the time. Well, both presidents, because there was the association and the representative club, and it was Linda Ward and it was Keith Pester, and they both said, "Look, let's give it 3 months part time and see how it goes." And then if it's proving to be a full time role, we'll reassess that. 3 weeks later, it was turned into a full time role, and off we went. And I think Manly United have got a full-time coaching department now. Not for every team, but certainly a director of coaching and a few other roles.
how good, and still one of the stronger clubs in the state too.
Mm.
Very cool. Um, so you get that coaching gig almost by accident. How do you go from there to then stepping into those shoes at the Mariners?
Yeah, well, so I got the opportunity to be Arnie's assistant with the Olyroos back in 2006 when we were trying to qualify for the 2008 Olympic Games, and we built a really strong connection at Northern Spirit. He was my coach, and turned into a mentor, and now one of my closest friends, probably my closest friend. Um, and so he offered me the opportunity to come into some Olyroos camps, and I said, look, I'll do it on one condition, that you're not doing this because I'm a mate. You think I can actually serve you and the team and do the job. And he said, I'd never give an appointment to a friend just because they're a friend. And so one thing led to another. I ended up being in most of the camps, and to the point where I was actually on the bench next to him in North Korea when we needed a point to qualify for the 2008 Beijing Games. Mark Milligan scored with his hand actually to take us to those games, and the referee didn't see it before VAR.
Yeah,
Um, so we ended up going to the games. I didn't go because every man and his dog jumped on board at that stage once we qualified.
I bet.
So a state league coach wasn't going to get the gig to go to Beijing, but fantastic experience. We worked well together, and then when he got the opportunity to go to the Mariners, he rang me up and said, "I've got a job up the road at the Central Coast. I'd like you to come as my full-time assistant." So that's where that all began. We had a fantastic owner in Peter Turnbull, and the club was really set up nicely. And he always said to me, he said, "I've signed for 3 years. You're signing for 3 years. At the end of those 3 years, I want you to make sure you're ready to take over from me. So there was
Oh, how
always that
good.
sort of succession plan, and with that came a lot of responsibility. And he was always challenging me. Same as Andrew Clark, same as John Crawley, who were also on the coaching staff at that stage. And yeah, we had a fantastic 3 years, and then I got the opportunity to take over. Had one really good year, and then things started to go a bit south for some of the reasons we've discussed earlier. But yeah, it was time for me to leave after 5 years.
So good, and also so good to hear those two comments that you said from Arnie, which is, I'm only giving you this because you are up to it, not because you're a mate.
Mm,
Which, from the stories I've heard, that's far from the norm in football in New South Wales and Australia, unfortunately.
mm.
And then also the fact that he could put his ego to the side and put a progression plan in place, because that does not seem to be the norm for a lot of elite level coaches either.
No, that's right. And I think that therein lies the difference between a coach and a leader, and a bona
Yeah.
fide leader. A bona fide leader will always be looking to develop those around them, give them ownership, empower them, and help take them to another level. So it's not just about your players; it's about your staff. And you see it with Ange. Ange has done it with a number of Australian coaches. He opens the door for them, they push through the door, and then it's up to them what they do with that. But he's been very good at that. Kevin Muscat, you can see, is following suit. There's a few who really take that side of their leadership seriously, and I think Ange and Arnie have really led the what am I trying to say? That they've led the way in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. It I think about both those players, and with all due respect to their playing careers, they it's almost like the players who are so gifted that they've never had to really do the hard yards. Not that they haven't worked hard, but they haven't had to learn the intricacies of different things, because it's just always come to them so naturally, whether it's football brain, whether it's the skills, whatever it is. But it almost seems that across the board, the best coaches aren't the elite players. There's a few exceptions, of course, but is that something you would agree with? Is it because when you said you weren't a natural footballer? I've heard Arnie talk about some of the battles with him um, on the journey. I'm sure it was him that was saying, his dad made him walk home from a game because he hadn't played well. Like that's a battle, right?
Yeah,
Is that would you agree with that?
I think there's definitely an element of truth to it. It's hard to generalize. I think being a player and being a coach are two completely different trades. You can understand the game as a player, but if you can't communicate, and if you don't have the leadership attributes to actually move into coaching and understand that, you don't go from being a superstar player to a superstar coach, like you've got to do your apprenticeship the right way, then it's going to fall apart at some point. And I think that's, if you just take Arnie just as an example, like, his first coaching gig was player coach for Northern Spirit when he came back from Japan.
Mm.
And by his own admissions, he's a completely different leader, manager, and coach today than he was back then. And I remember him vividly after, I think it might have been our first game. We lost to Sydney Olympic at North Sydney Oval, sellout crowd. I think he threw his boots into the crowd after the game and said, "That's it, I'm done." And the boots hit him in the back of the head when he turned around. Um, but that was his way of saying, it's time for me to take my coaching seriously. I can't do both. He ended up playing on, I think, for the rest of that season. But you've got to evolve the way you coach. You've got to understand that you've really got to learn your trade as a coach, and go through tough times. And I remember, my A license, AFC FA A license, the instructor was from India, and he came and he wrote a message on the whiteboard on day one, back in the days when we used whiteboards, um, not smart boards. But the message basically was, there is only one sure thing about being a professional coach: you will get sacked.
Yeah, right.
And that was the opening comment, and it was, it hit you right between the eyes, because you're thinking, well, in Australia, you're going to get sacked, and there's very few opportunities to coach at the top level. If you're a player and a coach doesn't like you, well, there's plenty of other contracts at other clubs that you can fight for. But coaching is a different beast.
Yeah, particularly when you're getting sacked for results aren't up to speed, and then well, how do you get another gig if you've just been fired for poor results? But they keep getting them. So
Yeah, that's right. Well, exactly. But I remember Mike Mulvey. Like Mike Mulvey, just as an example, right? He coached Brisbane to the title. I think he coached them to the double. I think he did a premiership and a grand final. Then he goes to a club like the Mariners. And they bring in a Usain Bolt, which completely derailed their preseason and the
yeah,
preparations and everything, and results didn't go his way, and he got sacked. Now, does that make him a bad coach? He's proven that he can coach a premiership and championship team, um, and then goes to a different setting, and it doesn't work out for different reasons. But yeah, it's an interesting gig, because ultimately, if the team's winning, it's because the players are great. If the team's losing, it's because the coach has no idea.
yeah. I even look at some of the marquee players that have been brought out to the A League and think about how it's all great for the publicity and the marketing, but probably derailed a few coaches along the way. Even just now with Wanderers, like that looks like a bit of a battle getting that balance right with Stage. So yeah, interesting that whole Usain Bolt thing. Anyway, that's another story. I want to get into more of your story, Phil. So you're at the Mariners. You have that great first year. When did your gut start telling you that something's not right here?
Yeah, look, I think it was probably around the mid-season transfer window in January,
Yeah.
when I'd
And the first year or the second year?
it was the second year more so.
Yeah.
The first year we went on a pretty good run, and we missed the grand final by a week. We missed out in the second round of the Asian Champions League by a point. Um, and those two games were within 4 or 5 days of each other. We had to go to Hiroshima, in Japan, and get a point, and then we had to come home and play the Wanderers at Parramatta, for a spot in the grand final. And it was just,
It's
the
tough.
players wanted to fight for both competitions. I knew we were a bit threadbare and probably didn't have the depth to go both competitions. And you talk about gut feelings.
Mm,
Um, that is one, when I look back on, I think I should have gone with my gut and left the main squad here for the game against the Wanderers, because our bread and butter, is the A League,
yeah.
and going to Hiroshima on a Wednesday, in the snow, and then coming back to Parramatta, that was, that would have been, yeah, late April, early May, and getting the same set of players to win both games, it was never going to work.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a gut feeling I ignored, and it's a learning. When you grin, lose, you learn. Um, but then fast forward to that off season, and I signed a new 3-year contract. And there was an understanding at the Mariners, definitely, that we were a developing and selling club. But to do that, you've got to have the right senior players, around the kids to help them on game day, and
Yeah.
on the training pitch, and take them under their wing. It's a coach's responsibility, of course, but you've got to have the right senior players around. If you think about the likes of, Daniel McBreen, Patrick Svansvik, Alex Wilkinson, those Danny Vukovic, those sort of senior players, at the time, were crucial in developing the likes of Bernie Abini, Mustafa Amini, Matty Ryan, Trent Sainsbury. The list goes on and on. So I felt after that second season, mid-season transfer window, when I saw about, I don't know, probably 6 good quality senior players walk out the door, and we weren't able to. I wasn't given a budget to replace them, like for like, or even close to like. I
Mm,
had to go looking in the state league, and that's with all due respect to the players that I signed at the time. But the balance was off, and that's when things started. And we had a couple of players who were coming to the end of their career, that season, and things just sort of derailed, from there. It was a tough time to manage, and that's when my gut was telling me that, it was going in a different direction.
yeah. what sounds tougher is then sort of what unfolded after that, and you're talking about, like, we see it now. Like, you hear one story in the media, but then you often hear another story telling you, well, that's not quite right. So tell us a bit about that, Phil.
Yeah, look, I think there's obviously all sorts of different elements to it, but you don't expect the media to dig too deep for the balance. They want the headline.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, the results weren't good enough. For me to turn around and say, I should keep the job. You've got to take responsibility for the way the team's going, even though. And I think this is probably the key. My gut was telling me that the control I needed over the elements to get good results, I was losing control of those elements for things that were out of my control. So there's always two sides to every story, but there's only going to be one winner in that situation, and that's the person that owns the club or the board.
Yep.
At the Mariners, it was a single owner model, and that's okay. You move on and get on with life. But I think the thing that really hurts the most at the time, and any coach who says it doesn't, is either they haven't got blood in their veins, or they live with their head in the sand and don't read anything or hear
Mm.
anything. But it's when the mistruths are put out there, in the public domain, and you read it or you hear it and you think that is so far from the truth. Someone's just made that up, or whether it's in the media or whether it's someone from a club spinning a line to protect their own backside, whatever it might be. But again, principles and values. The truth. You've just got to hold your head high and get on with it.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately in Australia, there's still a large percentage of the population that just takes what they're told on a news site as gospel, and it's
Mm.
just simply not. Like, you hear stories time and again, whether it's from straight from the source or it unfolds later, but you got to take that stuff with a grain of sand, or even better, just don't watch that shit at all.
Well, that's right. But this day and age, back when I played, the supporters came to the ground on a weekend and they clapped or booed. Um, this day and age with social media and the internet, you've got keyboard warriors, armchair critics like 24/7. It never
Yeah.
stops. And unfortunately, boards and owners and players. As well as coaches, of course, everyone, they read it, they listen to it, and it can build a narrative very, very quickly. So it's a tough world to live in at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure you're glad that you didn't have to navigate that with all that extra stuff thrown in, like the direct feedback from people who have probably no idea about the game, if we're honest.
Well,
Yeah,
the funny thing is, and like if I do go back into coaching, which I've never said I've left coaching for good, but if I did, with the knowledge I've got now, having been in the corporate world and executive leadership and held some positions, as a senior sales leader and things like that, you go back to sport so much more educated and wise than when I left, because I
yeah.
think sport, leaders in sport can learn a lot from the corporate world. Um, and if you've got the balance of having been a player, a coach, a leader in the corporate world, an executive leadership coach in the corporate world, like, it's a nice little balance to what you can bring to a role.
Oh, that's
So
good.
who knows?
Yeah, I know there's probably heaps of them, but can you give us one or two of those lessons that you have learnt that you didn't know that you could then take back into that space?
Well, I think in the corporate world, it's absolutely relentless. Like, you get 4 weeks annual leave a year. Generally, you don't take the 4 weeks at a time, so it's a couple of blocks of 2 weeks, or a week here and 3 weeks there, whatever it might be. But you in sport, you coach your pre-season. You've got your recruitment, obviously, in the off season. You coach your pre-season, get the team prepared. You've got the in season, and then the post-season. You get a bit of a break and then go again. Right, that's a cycle. In the corporate world, it is just relentless. It never stops. And being part of a big organisation, And a lot of football coaches will say it's 24/7 and you never stop thinking, and that's true. But I think the pressure in the corporate world, particularly a big organization, it can be relentless. So learning how to deal with that, learning how to regulate your emotions, learning, how to drive performance in an industry where there is, some very strong um, parameters and boundaries, probably more so than in the sporting world, are
Yeah,
some
right.
of the lessons that you would take back to sport. There's no doubt.
Mm-hmm. Um, I love that you mentioned emotional regulation. You said you're an open book, and when you're coaching, you share a lot of those real tough times. From everything you've described, you're someone that would be particularly in tune to people's emotional needs and sensitivities. So I'm sure if that's the case, that you've got your own example of where that emotional regulation was really challenging. Have you got one of those you could share?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I left the Mariners, that was one, definitely, and I probably needed someone really strong around me. Well, I had a few, my closest family, but my wife was the one that really flicked the switch in my mind to stop identifying as a football coach and start identifying again as a human being.
Yeah, yeah,
And as soon as I was able to do that and say, I'm not a football coach, I coach football, to Ariane Titmus's quote before about swimming, that was a seminal moment for me, and a great learning that I pass on now in all my leadership stuff. I think the other one was when the bridge collapsed in Israel, and I was part of the Maccabiah Games, the Australian football team, and we lost 4 lives that night, or around that tragedy, 1997. And the chef de mission for the Australian team got up on stage back at the hotel. We were part of a war zone. It was surreal what happened that night. When we got back to the auditorium at the hotel, I remember the chef de mission standing up with a microphone and just delivering some really calming, positive, powerful messages, that just brought a calm to all the emotion that was in the room that night. We already knew that there'd been one or two members of the team that passed away that night, and I think another two passed away, later through complications from the polluted water. But that was an example for me of how a really great leader was able to regulate their emotions despite what was going on, to actually lead a team of, probably 250, 300 people, and bring some sense to what had just happened, and the way forward. So there are a couple of examples that spring to mind. And the other one was probably my last game at the Mariners, when, obviously the circus going on around me, and I always use the bullfighter analogy. You've got the red rag, you've got the bull eyeing you off,
yeah.
you're in the ring. The minute you take your eye off the bull and start looking at the circus going on around you in the stands, the bull will get you. And I remember in that game against Newcastle F3 Derby, there was a stage of that game where I think the pressure started to get to me, and I was obviously having a moment of anxiety. It only went for 2 minutes, literally, but I remember thinking to myself, "Get yourself back in the moment." I clicked my fingers 3 times by my side, just as a bit of a physical trigger, if you like, or technique, just to get myself back in the moment. And the stands at the time, I remember, had sort of felt like they were closing in on me. The crowd had gone dead silent. They hadn't, but they had in my head.
Mm.
um, and the players probably weren't moving at full speed. As soon as I clicked my fingers 3 times and snapped myself out of it, got myself back in the moment, stands moved back to where they were supposed to be. The players were at full speed. I could hear everything in the crowd. Probably didn't want to hear a few of the things that were being said, but I did. Um,
Yeah.
and that was a really great learning for me about how to regulate your emotions in a moment of pressure, because I knew the next morning it was probably going to be the final straw with the ownership of the club, and that was probably my last game in charge.
Yeah. Wow. Um, were you familiar enough that you knew what was going on? Because to me, what that says is like stress had just reached that level where you're almost describing like a stroke, or everything sort of slowing down. And yeah, like were you conscious that that's what was going on, or you're a bit out of it?
Yeah, I think it was only a moment or two, so I
Mm,
got myself out of it very quickly. So I clearly identified that I was having a moment of anxiety or stress or whatever it was. But
mm,
stress does different things to different people. It's not whether you're going to be stressed; it's how you're going to deal with the stress.
yeah,
And I often say about my kids, and we've got six of them between us. If we can give them the skills, and they're all 21 to 32 now, so they're older. But along the way, if we could give them the coping mechanisms rather than saying, I just want my kids to be happy, because they're not always going to be happy. Life throws up different experiences and challenges. And, we've had an incredibly tough couple of years with a couple of our kids. But if we can give them the right mechanisms to cope and the resilience needed to navigate life, then I think we're going to be in a better place than if we just always say we just want our kids to be happy, because that's unrealistic. And it's kind of the same with regulating your emotions as an adult, and dealing with situations. You're going to be stressed. You're going to feel anxiety. It's
yeah,
how you cope with it, and whether you're prepared to go and ask for help if you need help. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I see that as a strength, not a weakness.
yeah. So good. Um, it's great to hear you talking about like the advice for your wife. It reminds me of a story. Craig McRae, the Collingwood coach, when they started, I think it was 0-6 in his first year, and he goes, I don't think I'm cut out for this. We're going to pack it in. And she just asked him a couple of really sort of pivotal questions, the same sort of thing, like, well what what are you doing now, and what do you need to do differently? Like
Mm,
if you were going to do it, being true to yourself instead of trying to do it the way that you think you need to. And he
yeah,
goes, oh, it needs to be more positive. And he said he got straight to the phone, rang all his assistant coaches and analysts and said, find me all the reasons why we're going to be good. And then history will say they went with a whisker of making the GF, and then they win the flag the next year just based on getting that advice. So men, your wife do know some things.
absolutely. And that the importance of surrounding yourself, and I call it the challenge chamber versus the echo chamber. So the echo chamber is everyone just telling you everything's fine, everything's great, you're the best, carry on,
Yeah,
versus a challenge chamber where your circle of influence is, includes people who are prepared, who love you and care about you, who are prepared to give you the truth.
yeah,
And challenge your thinking. And Ivan Cleary, his book, and this isn't, well, it's not meant to be a plug for his book, but it's called, not everything counts, but everything matters. And when they shifted their culture to that at the Penrith Panthers, all of a sudden they made 5 grand finals and won 4 on the trot. And yes, there's other stuff around that, but
yeah.
those sort of that mindset, is critical to everything that we do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't know about you, but that's why I have a coach that can challenge me when I'm slipping into victim or
Mm.
blaming externally, which we naturally do as humans very well. Can we dive a bit into not into the specific stories around your children, but just around some of those strategies? Because I'm the same, and I mean it's their stories for both my kids, so like that's theirs to tell. But there are times where I'm like, I'd love to be able to open up on some of the challenges that they've been through, and yes, they're in a good space now, and yes, they're really strong. But that's not because they haven't had tough stuff. They've had some of the toughest things. Like
Yeah,
it's the typical parenting style that I see now is like, let's hide them from all of those things, which I was doing the same thing myself, and that actually makes it worse. It's like you actually want them to be exposed to as many challenges as possible, but with guidance and them knowing that you're a safe place to actually talk about them.
yeah, uh, I couldn't agree more, Ian. And I think as our kids got older, and they reach sort of that 18, 19, 20 mark, and they kept coming to us talking about their issues. That's when we knew that we were on a winner, because you'd rather, and not just their issues, but if they tried something, or went out and drank too much or whatever it might be, and they actually come and share that with you. Or if they do get into a situation where they need you to come and bail them out or pick them up, they actually call you. They don't
Yep.
try and duck and weave and pretend it never happened or hide from it. So there's some of the, the light bulb moments for us as parents that we've actually been quite proud of. But I think as in their younger years, it was, you're right. It's kind of like I've got no shame whatsoever in telling you right here and now that I adopted the scare campaign when it came to drugs with my kids.
Mm.
And it was around every single thing that you put past your lips. If it's illicit or illegal, it can kill you in the blink of an eye. And as an old journo with the Manly Daily who did the crime reporting, I had plenty of what we'd call death knocks, where I had to go and knock on the door of parents who had lost a child because of a drug overdose, or
Mm-hmm.
just one of those situations that they took something and it killed them. So yeah, I certainly adopted that, and I'm pleased to say, it had a positive impact, and it's never over. The journey continues, but that was one thing that I was intent on, is making sure I educated my kids that there's a lot of dangers out there. Um, you've got to be able to identify them, and know what to do if you're in a situation. But I also think just you know being there. And my mum taught me very early on that, in parenthood, when I had my own kids, um, they might not talk to you when you're ready, but you always have to be ready when they're ready.
100%. Yeah.
And it was a great lesson.
Yeah.
It's played out many times.
Yeah. I remember cracking the shits because I'm saying to my young fella, you want to catch up? And I keep giving you these options. And then he'll ask me at a time where there's just no chance I could do it. And then it's just having that realization, that smack in the face is like, no, you've got to be there for them when they need it. You're
Yeah,
the parent, remember?
yeah, exactly.
Very good. Um, yeah, I think that ability to create that safe space to know that you'll just listen without judgment. I know I've had a few conversations with both of them at different times, just listening, going, yeah, I don't love or agree with what you're telling me, but I'll try my best just to listen without judgment um, or disgust or whatever the reaction might have been. And I
Yeah,
love that you talked about your mum's teaching you, because my mum was the same. She would pick me up, or my dad as well, pick us up anytime, anywhere. I think some of my friends probably played on that a bit too much when we couldn't get home from different places.
before the
But we
days of Uber.
exactly. But we did the same, right? Like, we'll let them know if there's no way we're going to be able to. We'll let them know, but otherwise, yeah, you call us because we'll come.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point too, and like you've got to, we've got um, four four daughters between us, and they've educated me as a dad, probably more than I've educated them, right? But it's
Yeah.
the number of times they say, you don't actually have to give us an opinion, or say anything. Sometimes we just need you to listen.
Mm.
And 9 times out of 10, that'll mean that I'll listen without saying anything, and then walk away and think about it, process it, and then come back with something that's actually quite valuable for them. And it goes back to Gus Hiddink, and I'll never forget when he coached the Socceroos. I was privileged to grab a quick chat with him once, that Arnie sort of facilitated for me, and I said to him, can you give me a couple of gold nuggets for, and this is back in 2005, so 20 odd years ago, give me a couple of gold nuggets for a young leader, a young coach at the time. And he said, you got two eyes, two ears, and one mouth for a reason. Right. And he was talking about, obviously listen,
Yeah.
and observe. And you don't always have to be the loudest mouth or the cleverest person. That was one of them. And the other one was, don't ever walk past a golden moment. And what he meant by that was, if you feel in your gut that strongly enough that you need to give someone some feedback, or you need to coach them, or give them some wisdom, a pearl of wisdom, don't walk past that moment, because it can be low effort and high impact.
Oh, man, I love that. I think regularly about different golden moments I have walked past. Like I remember one time I was going to a conference in the city. I've just bought myself like bacon and egg roll and a coffee, and I walked past a homeless guy. I'm like, 100 meters down the road, I should have just given both of those things to him, because that would have just completely changed his day. But
Mm.
just didn't dawn on me. And I'm like, if I get that a chance again, which I haven't, but like it's those small moments that can make all the difference. And people talk about, there's a good video. I can't remember the name of it. Lollipop moment. And this guy was talking about, he just went and did something. He was working at a college in the US, did something for these new starters, and they came back to him 3 years later and they said, what you said actually brought us together. We're getting married. We want you to come to the wedding. Like, it's those small opportunities to make a difference. It's like, always take them if you feel that calling.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually use golden moments as a bit of an icebreaker in some of the leadership stuff that I do. Like, you've got 10 minutes, go find a golden moment. Don't walk past it.
It's good.
Wherever that is, in the room, outside
Yeah.
the room, walk
Yeah.
outside the building. To your point, I went and did that once about a year ago. I'll say once. It was a fantastic experience. I actually ended up having a 15-minute conversation with a homeless man down in Melbourne. I gave him a coffee, and the conversation was incredible. I actually walked away wiser and more educated, and probably with more energy from that conversation than he ever would have got from me. But it was remarkable.
It's a real ego check, isn't it? I think about our kids when they're little. They want to give money to the busker. They want to give money to the homeless, and maybe there's a bit of us going, "Oh, not sure," but they all they see is someone in need, and we can definitely learn a lot from those. You mentioned the Maccabiah Games. I think you were telling me, like, was it you or your brother was like right at the edge where the bridge broke? Like, they
Mm.
must have. Well, I don't know. Must have been a traumatic aftermath in a lot of ways for the both of you.
Yeah, it was. And I was in journalism at the time, so I sort of did a couple of first-person pieces from over there for the Daily Telegraph and the Manly Daily, and I guess that was good for me because it was kind of counselling.
Therapeutic. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Therapeutic, that's
Yeah.
right, for
Yeah.
me to actually write what I was experiencing. But yeah, my brother, the bridge was built like that. It went over the Yukon River, and it was an arced bridge, a temporary bridge, and it collapsed in on itself. So it was almost like a trap door. And the,
Mm,
the Australian cricket team, of which my brother John was a member, was right at the top of the arch when it collapsed. So they were almost the first to hit the water. And I just remember um, the first screams that came out were gunfire, because there was some unrest in Israel at the time. That obviously there still is, but there was a yell of gunfire. So we were on a path leading towards the bridge. I was probably about 150 metres from the bridge, because it was all in alphabetical order of the sports,
mm.
cricket before soccer. Um, and then someone said, "No, the bridge has collapsed," and I'm thinking, I know my brother would have been there or thereabouts. So I've started running towards the bridge. There was some army officers with
E-
machine
Even though
guns.
even though there's talk of guns, you're just completely
Well,
no,
there
that's
was, yeah, that was in my mind, but then I heard the bridges collapsed.
right.
So that was
That's all you need
probably
to
what
hear.
gave me the courage to
Yeah.
actually run rather than into gunfire. But
Yeah.
there were army guards there with machine guns across their chests, and
Yeah.
I actually grabbed one because he stood in my way as I was running full pelt, and I used to have a bit of speed back in those days. And he said, "You can't go in there." And I said, "My brother's in there." He said, "No, you're not going." And I grabbed him by the gun and actually threw him out the way. Now I'm 5'10", and back then was probably about 90 kilos dripping wet. He was
Mm,
about I don't know, 6'2", 6'3", and built and trained. But that's your survival instinct, right? I
adrenaline.
knew my
Yeah.
brother was in trouble, and adrenaline, and
Mm,
anyway, I found him scampering up the side of the riverbank, actually holding a couple of other people, dragging them to safety as well. So, you talk about heroic moments
mm,
under duress. That was certainly one of them. And luckily for my brother, he only copped a badly corked leg out of it, because he landed on some of the the scaffolding, but yeah, there were others a lot worse off, and it was yeah, it was tragic for the Maccabiah Games. We had 85,000 people in the stadium waiting to cheer us on for the opening ceremony, and we never made it because of this bridge, and we lost 4 lives. So it was absolute tragedy. But out of it came a galvanising experience at those games, and the cricket team, I think, won. I'm pretty sure they won it, gold medal, and the football team under the late great Ian Gray had our best ever finish. Yeah, there was some silver linings in a pretty dark cloud.
Yeah, wow. Um, I know we're sort of limited for time, so I won't dive into all of that. But um, I would just love to ask you about football in Australia. Um, to me, at times it feels like we're heading in the right direction. But at other times you just hear stories and you just wonder, like, are we ever going to be able to unlock this beast because of just so many vested interests? I described to someone earlier today, it's almost like it's mafia, like a way, everyone wants to get a drink and everyone wants to have a say and everyone wants to be part of it. Give me something positive that I can latch on to that says that there's a brighter future than what we're seeing at the moment, particularly from that A-League level.
Well, I think the silver lining is we have a professional league with the men's A-League. We've got a women's league, the Ninja A-League, that is on the rise. And I say that with a little bit of caution, because I think there's a long way to go before that becomes professional for the women. And then we've got the Socceroos and the Matildas, who, you know, they inspire millions of kids to play the game. So there's some positives there, because we'd be in a lot darker place if we didn't have professional competitions, and we'd be in
Yeah,
a lot darker place if we didn't have national teams that we could be proud of. Are they perfect? Of course they're not. Are we where we want to be? Of course we're not. But that's what we've got. But I believe, I firmly believe, that everything is leadership's fault. And I don't think leadership of our game in Australia at different levels, and I'm talking, nationally and state based, is not where it needs to be for the betterment of the game. I know there's a lot of people that put a lot of hard work in, but when you talk about true leadership and walking towards challenges and true collaboration, and working for the betterment of the game, not the betterment of individuals, or individual organisations, then we'll be in a lot better place. And I think we have a long way to go. I think the model is wrong. I think the ecosystem is not connected. It's not an ecosystem, because an ecosystem is connected. We're not.
yeah,
It's too siloed.
yeah.
So, do I have the silver bullet? No, I don't. But I know where it starts, to find the silver bullet, and that is with leadership.
Yeah, well said. It makes me think, some of the guys you mentioned today and your good self would be a good step in the right direction. Arnie, Ange, guys who are absolutely passionate about the future of football in Australia, and they are definitely people that are putting football first. Great answer, Phil. Mate, thank you so much for coming on. I knew after we chatted a few weeks back, when we very much on the same page, that this was going to be a good one, and you didn't let me down. So well played. I appreciate you coming on and investing a bit of time in chatting with me, Phil. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, Ian. It always is, because I do love the game like you do. It runs through our veins. There is one organisation that we didn't get a chance to talk about, and I just want to mention that if I can before we leave, and that's Football Coaches Australia, because this was a real passion job of mine with Glenn, when we set it up, and it was set up because coaches actually really care about the game. Because you don't go into coaching if you don't care about the game. And if you do go into it without caring about the wider game, then you're probably in it for the wrong reasons. But coaches, it can be a lonely place. It needs an organisation to put a collective arm around coaches while they're in a job, while they're out of a job, transitioning both ways. So any coaches out there that are listening to this and you aren't part of Football Coaches Australia, sign up, because it's not just about, protection and an organisation will speak for you. There's it's there for the journey of your coaching career, whether that's at the amateur level, the professional level, semi-professional level, boys, girls, men, women. There's continued education, there's wellbeing programs to support you. It's a fantastic organisation that needs to get the weight of numbers with coaches joining it to build its strength. So FCA, Football Coaches Australia, and it's an unashamed plug for it, because coaches need that collective support, because it can be such a lonely place.
Yeah, well said. Great little addition, and well played for doing my job for me and adding that one in as well.
No, pleasure. Thanks. And look, congrats to you, Ian, on the job you're doing, mate, because the more forums and platforms we have to speak about the game, the more awareness it gets. And we are the highest participation sport by a long way in this country, but how do we transition that to, or translate that to, the top level? That's the silver bullet we're all looking for, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just quietly, I'm definitely a football coach, but I'm a NRL fan rather than football. Even I've got the FC shirt on today, so yes, and that needs to change too, right? Like, anyway, that's another podcast.
Well, therein lies a test case, isn't it? It's a real one, and it's what we've got to face into. So I love the fact that you've shared that. Because that is the reality of our situation. And I've had conversations with a lot of friends of mine who are rugby union, rugby league, AFL, basketball, tennis fans, cricket fans. It doesn't mean they have to be rusted on football fans, but how do we get them across to our game to give them a taste of how good it is and why it's so good? Because if we can get to that, we'll be in a better place. But thanks for having me. I've talked way too much.
No, not at all. It made me think of what you talked about in the Spirit Days. Like, there is opportunities to engage those people. And I think when I was at Fox, I'd be on them forever going, I'm an A-League fan until the league starts. You have to have that grand final played and won before that first game of the season, because I think that's just such a opportunity that they're missing. But anyway, I can rant about that sort of stuff all day. We better end it there. Thanks again, Phil, mate. Appreciate it.
Good on you. Thanks, Ian. Pleasure.
So many great lessons there from Phil today. The highlight for me was the ability for Phil to be able to map them across different areas of his life and be able to pass on those stories to you about how you can do the same. The lesson to add to your game plan, knowing your why. I loved how Phil could just rattle his off very clearly, and how powerful an influence you can have on other people, whether you're coaching, with that emotional regulation that he described with the chef de mission from the Maccabiah Games. Just don't underestimate the positive influence you can have on other people if done the right way. If you're looking to find your why and find more purpose in your life, then I'll make sure I add the link to the show notes so you can jump in and join the purpose training. And then hopefully one day soon you can know your why down to one sentence and be able to rattle it off live like Phil did just then. You've taken the time to listen to this whole episode. Now it's time to take action. Commit to one thing you've learned today and make it happen. And to avoid any obstructions, join the Sport is Life movement by clicking on the link in the show notes.